Have you ever felt like there just aren't enough hours in the day? What if the problem isn't actually your workload, but the way you're thinking about time? In this episode, I sit down with time management expert and bestselling author Laura Vanderkam to talk about how shifting hours from time scarcity to time abundance can completely change how you experience your schedule. We unpack why thinking in 168 hours instead of 24 changes everything, how weekly planning helps you become the ringmaster of your own life, her language, and why the evening hours after work might actually be the most overlooked opportunity in your week. If you've been feeling overwhelmed by your to do list, this conversation should help you rethink how time actually works. Enjoy. Hey, y'all, I'm your host, Courtney Cecil. Welcome back to the Life Management System. Inside this episode, I am tickled to host Laura Vanderkam, a Philadelphia based mom of five and a time management expert. So, most of you that tune in know that I'm an industrial systems engineer. What you probably don't know is I actually started my career in time management and motion studies. So, in addition to really having that at the core root of my technical training, I have been a raving fan of Laura's for some time. So you might know her by some of her books. I Know How She Does It, or What the Most Successful People Do Before Breakfast, but she's actually published seven time management books with her eighth just around the corner. So you could naturally just catch all of her wisdom on her own podcast. But today, I'm excited to bring her here to you today. One, because I think it's going to greatly benefit you, but also to help promote her new book, Big Time, A Simple Path to Time Abundance. It launches on May 5th. And I know that is something that all of us here are dreaming about. So, like me, you probably recognize time as your most coveted asset. And I think Laura is going to be able to help us expand some of our thinking and that fear based scarcity that keeps us stuck regarding this narrative of, oh my gosh, there is just never enough time. So, Laura, welcome to the Life Management System.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm tickled to be here. Very excited to be
Yeah.
chatting. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Laura, before we get into the meat of what I really want to talk about, can you start by summarizing the book? So, for anybody on YouTube, you can see the cover, but Big Time, A Simple Path to Time Abundance, again, is the title. So, can you help summarize this book specifically, but more importantly, of eight books, what sets this one apart?
Yeah, well, that is always a good question, isn't it? And I promise that writing about time management for busy people, my fear is that I will be wasting people's time with anything I'm writing. So I promise this is all new. It is things I have generally not written about before. But Big Time is about how to help people fall in love with their schedules. I really do believe that when we move beyond the sense of time scarcity and start to see time as a friend, we can accomplish all kinds of things that it would be hard to do without that mindset. So, in this book, I talk about the upsides of time tracking. I know a subject that is probably very near and dear to your heart. I talk about managing a complex life in a way that is not chaotic. I talk about evening hours. I talk about improving work days through a time study I did with that. And generally about how we can start to view time through a bigger lens. A lot of people are focused only on the day in front of them, the 24 hours we have right in front of us. And that's an inherently limiting view of time. But the good news is, for the vast majority of us, this day is not all we have. We have much more time beyond this. And when we expand our scope, we look at the next 168 hours, or we look at even the next 8,760 hours in a year, we start to see how much space we truly have.
I can certainly appreciate that and know that despite being a traditionally big picture thinker and visionary, I absolutely get stuck in the pattern of thinking about, well, crap, here goes one more day and one more spin at getting less done than I thought, or feeling like there's never enough time in the day. And I absolutely know that most of the listeners that tune in do so because that's where they feel stuck too. They are in a place where they're feeling like life is quite unsustainable and that time is, in your language, like very scarce and we are desperate for it. So, for that person who, like me, is stuck in the 24-hour thinking, they always feel like they're drowning, they always feel like there's not enough time. Laura, help us understand, what is a small step that we can take to move closer to this place of this notion of time abundance?
Well, if you could just expand your notion of time from 24 hours to 168 hours, there are 168 hours in a week. So 24 times 7 is 168 hours. And right there, that tends to give people a different perspective because, like, think about this. Here's a little equation. Somebody who works 40 hours a week, so a full-time job, and who sleeps 8 hours a night, so that is 56 hours per week, has 72 hours each week for other things, right? Now, when we're looking at a standard Tuesday where we're working full time, we feel like there's just tiny slivers of time here and there. And yet you look at the whole week and you have even a full time job and enough sleep. There's 72 hours somewhere. I'm not saying that they're easy to find or that it's easy to seize them, but the math suggests that they are there. And people are like, well, I commute. Okay, 50 hours. You got 62 hours for other things. You're working more than that. Let's say you're gone 60 hours. You have 52 hours for other. We're still talking a big chunk of time, right? Again, might need to be creative about seizing it, but the time is probably there. So if you could start looking at your life in terms of weeks instead of days, then you can start to see, well, okay, I have this long list of things I want to do. I want to exercise. I need to work. I want to see my family. I want to bake. I want to, learn French. I want to see my friends. And if you've talked yourself into one day, probably all those things are not going to fit in Tuesday. But we don't just live on Tuesdays. In the course of a week, could you exercise 3 times? Could you spend 15 minutes 3 or 4 times a week learning French? Could you, have coffee with a friend for 45 minutes? I'm guessing all of those things can fit in 168 hours, even if they are not fitting in every single day.
Yeah, one of the things that you also just called out that I want to double click on is this all or nothing thinking. Just because you might not be able to work out 5 days a week, 6 days a week, doesn't mean that you can't a couple times. I think that's very important. Your commute, yes, you might have to do it, but that doesn't have to be completely sunk and wasted time. So I don't want to steal your thunder. We'll talk about the golden hours later because I think it flows better later in the show. But I I do believe that all of that time, that commuting time as an example, can give back to you as well. I remember when I was living in DC and commuting every single day into the office in the city, I got to read and I missed that. And that was time for me that I literally only got to pour into myself. Or when I'm commuting, I live in Charlotte now and for many years have been commuting into an office. Well, guess what? That's time I get to catch up with my friends. Like that's the time where I am always scheduling a catch up with somebody that I care about that is doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. It can be such a win-win when we look for it. So I think that there's just so much beneath what you just shared too, Laura, that I'm sure you get into in the book. So I want to talk real quickly about these mini time logs that you have done. But I'm curious before I get to this next question, at what span, what time span or time horizon do you tend to look at when you have people collect their time?
I generally have people track a week because a week is the cycle of life as we live it.
Hmm.
So if I ask you what is a normal day for you, is it going to be a Tuesday or is it going to be a Saturday? Well, they both occur just as often and they both have the same number of hours. But for many people, those days look quite different. And so we want a unit of time that encompasses both. And a week tends to be the unit of repeat, as a mathematician would put it, in the pattern of our lives. So I think that is the smallest unit of time that will give you a holistic perspective of what your life truly looks like. Now, inevitably, when people track a week for me, they're like, well, that wasn't a typical week. And so we learn that weeks can be different. But I think we can still get a lot of information about our lives from looking at a week because often it's the difference between that week and what we think of as typical, which will be helpful for rewriting a lot of narratives about our lives. When I have people track their time, and thousands of people have done this for me at this point, a lot of people find that they are working fewer hours than they think. So we tend to remember our longest, most stressful weeks as typical. But if you have one of those long, stressful weeks, like maybe 4 or 5 times a year, yes, it's going to stand out in your mind, but that is not the normal state of affairs. Um, People sleep more than they think. Again, we remember our worst nights as typical, and we tend to think of our average sleep as what's happening on a Tuesday, as opposed to building in whatever happens Friday through Saturday and Sunday as well. People have more discretionary time than they think they have. We don't remember a lot of it because it's not spent in memorable ways, but that doesn't mean it isn't there. People who have young children spend more time with their kids than they think they do. Even people who are working full time, because the kids are around. Someone has to be with them constantly. That is often you. So, there's more time with family than a lot of people think there is. And so when you add up all these different stories that are different than the picture many people have in their minds and the catastrophic stories people are telling themselves, people tend to feel better about their time after they track their time. That was one of my discoveries in my study for big time. And so, I'll throw that out there as a suggestion for anyone who'd like to feel more of a sense of time abundance.
Yeah. I love that the insight is like, wow, I feel more balanced essentially. It seems like the summarize that theme than I really thought I was. And I think that to call out where you started, Laura, there's no such thing as a typical week. Like there
Yeah.
might be what you conceptualize as a typical week, but there will be a wrench thrown in every single one. It is part of working, it is part of living and having to commute. It is part of being a human and having health problems. It is part of having kids. There's no such thing. I'm glad I asked that question. I'm sure that I knew this at one point in time, because I'm sure you've talked about it in one of your books that I've read, but I always have my clients do their time studies across 2 weeks because I feel like it, to your point, like you have to have a week. The week tends to encapsulate a standard protocol for your family and your rhythm. But that way, people aren't able to come back to me and say, oh, but it's, that week wasn't standard. I'm like,
I
but
broke my tooth, and so I had to take a half day off work to go to the dentist. So it's not a typical week. Yeah, well, life happens. I love that, and I mean the reason I haven't done it is because it's often hard enough to get people to track one week.
yes.
So,
Yep. Oh, I believe
in the
like, yeah,
interest of
that's,
getting data, I've
yeah.
generally asked people to do one week. But some people are so excited about what they've discovered in one week that they keep going. And
Yeah.
I have tracked my time for about 11 years now. And yes, I can say there there is no typical week. Every week is different in some way, but I start to see, what the variance tends to look like as well.
Yeah. Well, that's the advantage of me having clients that paid me to be
To
to
do
help
this,
them,
like they
yeah,
got to do it. They
as
got to do it.
opposed to like trying to do research. It's like, no, we're gonna really get to the bottom of the trend
Yeah,
as
yeah.
opposed to. Oh, so, what do you believe has been the biggest reducer of stress then for people that go through that? Is it really just the awakening of the hours or like realizing that things aren't as dire as they thought?
I
Or is
think
there
it is
some other trend or pattern they're picking up on?
I think it is that things are not as dire as they thought. I mean, I have come to see that there are so many negative stories and so many, you know, despairing stories that people tell themselves about their time. And in general, a time log will show that there's a lot more nuance to that story than the initial unhappiness we might feel about it. And so when people see that, their general time satisfaction does tend to rise, because it also is a mindset shift as well, that it's not that I need a total lifestyle overhaul. Like, I'm not saying everything will be perfect when you look at your time log. I mean, it won't be, but we tend to see that a lot of problems are solvable with little tweaks, as opposed to, I need an entirely different life.
Yeah, that is so powerful. And I think about what somebody can control versus what feels massively out of their control. And the good thing about little tweaks is most of that stuff tends to be within their control, something that they can actually effectuate and actually bring to life for themselves. So that is just such an empowering place and piece of knowledge that they can truly apply. Like this is something, if you were listening and thinking, well, okay, I kind of understand the concept, I'm not sure I buy it yet, I would challenge you to take Laura up on her recommendation of just tracking for a week and seeing what actually comes up of it and what insights there are for you. So Laura, if you think about that, the actual 168 hours, or I believe I've heard you say 8,760 hours in a year. Is that right?
Correct. You got the math right.
Okay. That sounds like a lot of time when you say it out loud, even for the busiest of busiest people. Yet, so often we feel crushed by our daily to-do list and the things we don't get done, let alone the bigger picture goals of us being like, oh, I would love to have another child, maybe not five. I'm so impressed by you, but like you were the perfect example, Laura, of somebody that said, you know what, this can still be manageable, based on how I manage my time and what I do with it. Like you have a thriving career. You've written 8 books. You have 2 podcasts. You have 5 kids. I don't see wings on you or anything like that. Like
No,
you
there
are
are
still
no wings,
human.
trust me.
Yeah, yeah. You still have to sleep like the rest of us, I'm
Oh yeah.
sure. You still
Yeah.
have to eat. So you were just a walking testimony for what you preach, which I think is beautiful, that you really are very authentically doing what you do. So if somebody else is sitting here and being like, okay, well, sure, but I don't see that path for me. Like, how can somebody reorient their thinking or reorient the math or reorient their to-do list or anything that will help them see the possibility of 2 big goals coexisting at one time?
So I think that, aside from time tracking, one of the things that has been most helpful for me is a dedicated weekly planning time. And this is a concept I explore more in my chapter on becoming the ringmaster of your life. People often talk about life being a circus, and they mean that it's chaotic, but that is a slur on circuses because circuses are the most organized events you will ever see. Like nobody is getting shot out of a cannon at the wrong time, right? There's lots of stuff going on. There's 8 motorbikes going around a sphere, but they know exactly where they are supposed to be to a fraction of a second. Multiple things are planned in sequence. People have thought about what if something goes wrong, as most acrobatic acts have a net, and the net is so well placed that when you fall into it, you're not going to get injured and the show will go on. That is what we want our lives to look like. And that is what I sort of think about my goal as I plan my life is that my life is a 3-ring circus, a very orderly 3-ring circus where I have my career, my relationships, which is, family and friends, and then myself. And each week, I am looking at those 3 circles, those 3 spheres, and I'm asking over the next week, what is most important to me in this sphere? What would I most like to see happen by this time, 168 hours into the future? Are those things already on the calendar? Awesome. If they are not, let's get them on there. Or maybe there are steps toward larger goals I want to take and I can go ahead and put into the next week. So I do that for those 3 spheres: career, relationships, self. And then, look at what is already on the calendar. What am I already committed to over the next week and make sure that the logistics are worked out for that to happen. Is there a big speech I'm giving on Thursday? Well, then I've hopefully carved out time to practice earlier in the week. If there's something important in one of the kids' life, I just had a parent teacher conference, for instance, and I made a little time to think about it beforehand, what I wanted to discuss in that. Am I prepared for all these things? Have I put in something fun? What am I genuinely looking forward to over the next week? Because you can have a perfect schedule, but if there's nothing to look forward to, you really need to go back and work on it again. And, I just do this every week, get my marching orders for the week, check back in the next week. Did it happen? Did it not? If it didn't, what went wrong? Or, is there something I can learn from this? And do it again for the next week. And I promise that if you do this weekly planning and this weekly priority setting, week after week after week, your life will become a lot less chaotic, even if it is very complex. And you will feel like you are making progress in all these 3 circles, these 3 circus rings of life.
I think planning is the single most important thing somebody can do for themselves. And I know a lot of type Bs that will, vehemently disagree, but I I I think that you're onto something, Laura, and this is absolutely what I encourage my clients to do. And even for the type B ones, I'm like, let's help demystify this for a second. Yes, you're planning. Yes, that takes work. Yes, that feels more calculated and more restrictive, but it's the opposite. When you plan, you know that your priorities are being cared for. So what it is that you value most is being cared for. And that allows you to say yes and no more freely as things come up. If you get a wild hair, like right now, I'm planning with a girlfriend. I live in a lake here in Charlotte, and she wants to come up paddleboarding. And I was like, Mel, if you get a wild hair, then it doesn't matter if it's a weekday or not. Just let me know because I know where my big chunks of time are that will allow me to very easily say yes to you on the fly. Like that'll even for somebody very calculated and intentional like me that would not at all associate with being a type B, it allows me the freedom to just be like, heck yeah, let's do this. I don't have to say no because I know that I have already cared for my priorities and therefore the rest of it can, can come and go as it pleases. So say the ability to say yes, the ability to say no happens when you know that stuff is cared for. It is when you don't plan that you have to say things like, sorry, I can't commit to that, or I can't say yes because I don't know how the kids are going to get from point A to point B, or I don't know when I'm going to get my workout in, or I don't know what my partner's doing and whether or not he or she is available. Like it really does unlock a lot of freedom for us in ways that we otherwise, I think, underestimate.
Yeah, and with that, I mean, people have the idea that planning is about things that they don't want to do. And I
Yeah.
would say, okay, there's probably some of that, but ideally you're planning things you want to do. Like you want to be at the place in life where you're planning lots of things that you want to do. And I think when you continually do that, planning becomes a lot more exciting and fun. And maybe you can be even particularly good about planning in fun things for your first run of it. Like, challenge yourself. You're going to plan in twice this week to get together with friends. You're going to plan some adventure on the weekend that you've wanted to do for ages. Because when you know that those things fit in, it makes you feel a little bit more excited about figuring out the rest of the puzzle.
Yeah, I always tell people to plan the fun first. Like that is the very first thing that I do at the beginning of the year is I map out my vacations because I want to have something to look forward to. And I know that that is foundationally what lights my soul up. It's time with my friends, it's time with my family, it's time for me to go explore. I'm a big traveler, so I always like to have those big things to look forward to, even at the macro level, let alone the week to week level where I know that I have consistent happy hours or dinners with girlfriends or even catch ups on the commute. It makes everything more palatable when you plan your fun first.
Absolutely.
So when you think about, let me pull on that thread, Laura, for a second, of being the ringmaster of your own circus, essentially. I think that your point, I will be looking at circuses very differently now. But to your point, they are very, very calculated. And a quarter of a second is enough for somebody to get dropped, that's otherwise propelling through the air. So for the parents that are juggling the three main components, so those main buckets, the career, relationships, and self, I think that was it, right? So for the ones that are managing those three, do you have any recommendations by way of typical routines or processes that help their day to day run more smoothly? So perhaps not as well oiled as a circus, but at least makes them feel like there's a little less friction in the system.
Well, I think it's good to set house rules, lots of systems that happen automatically without anyone having to expend too much time or effort thinking about it. If you study any sort of large organization, they tend to have policies of how things are done, and some of those might be silly, but there's often a good reason for it. And I've studied over the years. One of my fascinations is very large families, so bigger than mine, and people who have like 10 kids. What are they doing to avoid chaos? And there's often very good systems for how things work. And we have a few in my house. For instance, Monday night is always pasta night. Nobody really wants to think about what is for dinner on Monday. Everybody likes pasta. It's easy enough to make. So that is what we eat for dinner every Monday night. Now, maybe at some point in the future, we'll decide we're tired of this, we're sick of this and all this, but this has carried us for a while to get into the start of the week when things are often a little bit more stressful of the startup of things and weekly routines, that not having to think about dinner. And, there's always stuff for making pasta in the house because that's just on the regular grocery list whenever groceries are obtained, so dinner is easy. Wow. Like, people spend all this effort thinking about meal planning and stuff or preparing meals on Sunday for the week. It's like, no, no, just have something simple you're going to have every Monday. That's one thing you can do. I would also say planning for things to go wrong. Like, you want a resilient schedule. In my family, my husband and I both travel for work, which means right there we have to have systems in place, or if we're both gone. What happens? Who's with the kids? Who's driving them? It's a little bit more challenging right now. There's two of my kids. One of my kid is off at college. My two teenage children can definitely babysit for some time for the younger kids. So if there's like an hour or two gap, it's not a problem. But obviously for overnight, we need to make sure we have people. But they can't drive either. So it's also the problem if we need backup drivers for various things. So, you figure it out. Like, if my flight is delayed coming home from this, what is going to happen? And if you've thought about that, when that does happen, then it's not chaotic. Like, you just follow the procedure that you have laid out for when things go wrong. For many people, having a net, like in a circus, means certain things like having extra childcare, having people around that you can call in favors because you've done favors for them. Like having open space in your schedule is another good idea, because when you have open space in your schedule, then something going wrong doesn't just displace everything and force you to borrow time from the future. You can still achieve your priorities, even when life happens.
Yeah, I think I call it breathing room. And I think that breathing room is one of probably the most foundational shift that I have personally made for myself, because I, as an industrial engineer, have always been so calculated down to the minute. And then it was about 3 or 4 years ago where I realized that same level of intentionality of being so meticulous with every single minute actually was causing more stress to me, because to your point, Laura, I didn't have the breathing room in my schedule. So when something went wrong, because it inevitably does, you're getting in the car and all of a sudden a kid has to go to the bathroom or forgot his or her socks, or the dog runs out the door and you have to go chase it. That, like, there's always something. So the breathing room did so much to reduce my stress level. I also heard in what you said, essentially, if I was to boil it down, that it is critical to build systems that work despite you, not because of you. Like, that's one of my most foundational principles that I work with my clients on. When you, first of all, building a system makes the world go round. I'm a full believer in that. And to your point around dinners on Monday being pasta nights, a system doesn't have to be big. It just has to be predictable and routine. So people and everybody in your ecosystem knows how to engage with it and knows what to expect. But the beautiful thing about it, like pulling from your example of you and your husband both traveling, your systems, Laura, are working despite you, because you have built systems that can be resilient based on the conditions of that week, not because you're the one sitting there masterminding every single detail. And I think that inherently is a very freeing principle, because so many of the moms that are listening really do carry the weight of the system themselves, which means that it's inherently still dependent on her being a part of it, as opposed to being able to operate despite her, and despite, how, whether she's sick, whether she's traveling, how much workload she has. And I think that's just a really foundational principle that you called out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, if you want to have any sort of career that involves travel or, otherwise unpredictability, you can't be the linchpin where things only happen if you are there. Now, I will admit there are some things that may not happen. I'm not sure that people shower as regularly as they perhaps should if I am gone for an extended period of time, but usually nothing important falls apart.
Yeah, yep. Well, the other thing that you said that I think is really important is pulling on somebody else to exchange carpool needs or that sort of thing. My husband, so I've got a speaking gig coming up with an organization, major Fortune 50 organization, that I'll be talking to people that are manufacturing line workers that are right out of college all the way to executive. So big span. And my husband looked at me and said, you're going to have to tailor what you say. And I looked at him. I was like, I'm sorry. This is not my first rodeo. Thank you. And this is not my first rodeo. I do speak very regularly to a very diverse audience. I just happen to focus my B2C business and my podcast on working moms. But I speak regularly to other diverse populations of people, including men. So I thank you. I've got it. But he started probing a little bit then about this notion of onboarding. He's like, well, I think, but yes, but I also think that when you talk about people that are used to having dual income and, higher salary potential and that sort of thing. I was like, honey, have so many outsourcing examples that require $0 that I talk about when I'm talking to college kids. Like, I got you. And you just called attention to one of those, Laura. And that's when you take care of the people around you, they take care of you too. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be a quid pro quo. It can be out of the goodness of your heart. You make somebody else's life easier. If you're like our neighbor, we often commute into the city for meetings. Our neighbor hardly does, but we're going to take her kid with us. I don't expect that anything will eventually come back to serve me, but often it does. That's just what happens. So it doesn't have to require money. It doesn't have to require you to have local family to be able to make your world spin without you being a part of it.
Yeah, you just have to build your community. And for many people, part of that community would be people who are paid to help you, because
Yeah.
that is a way that we can expand the reach of support, particularly for people who don't have extended family nearby.
Yeah, well, that's certainly the route we've had to go to survive. But I just keep reminding myself that being able to stay in my career and being able to pay for that actually makes me more money in the long run than it does what I'm paying to get rid of. So I have to have that pep talk with myself daily.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
So okay, let's pull back. Let's go back to the dinner. Let's put our head in the dinner space again. Pasta dinner night on Mondays. You have this notion, Laura, of golden hours in the evening that you talk about. And I think that is just such a eloquent way to put it. And it's so hard for us oftentimes when we're in the thick of kids and homework and dinner time and shower time and all the bedtime duty stuff. Like that can feel pretty heavy and chaotic, particularly for those parents of younger children. But yet you are a full believer that golden hours are a possibility. And for your circus of seven, it seems like you've done that beautifully. Can you help bring that concept to life and how parents might be able to shift either their thinking or actual application of turning what they feel like is probably a heavy hands-on evening to this notion of being golden?
Yeah, so golden hours is a phrase I use to describe the time after work and before bed on weekdays. So just as retirees are experiencing their golden years, where they're spending time on family and leisure after their years of work, we get a miniature version of this every weekday evening when we have our golden hours after work. And I know evenings are incredibly hard to use well. Even people who have these elaborate morning routines, often things kind of fall apart toward the end of the day. We are out of energy, people are out of sorts, but it is a lot of time to write off as unusable. I've certainly seen from my time diary projects that many people are done with work or work related responsibilities by 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. People don't go to bed until 10, 11. I mean, we're talking at least 4 hours, and oftentimes it's more like five. And yes, there are things you have to do. If you've got small kids, you need to take care of them and feed them and get them to bed. If you've got older children, maybe you're taking them to different activities, but there's often still some discretionary time within this. And the idea of at least approaching your evenings, your golden hours, as time that should be enjoyed, can change your mindset a lot. And what I challenge people to do is to come up with one 30-minute intention, something you hope to do in your golden hours that is fun, relaxing, satisfying for you. For many people, that could be, I want to read this book for 30 minutes after my kids go to bed, right? Maybe for other people, it's that I'm going to go for a family walk because it's a beautiful day, or we're going to go out for ice cream as the weather is getting nicer. Maybe it's doing a puzzle for 30 minutes at night. Maybe it is that you and your spouse want to watch a specific show. That can be fine. The problem is that many times we approach screen time unintentionally people are just like on their phones while they're sort of vaguely scrolling around Netflix trying to choose something to watch. It's meaningless time. Like, this is time you could have to gather more, and make it more satisfying if you actually choose what to do with it. And 30 minutes is not a huge ask. You're going to have 30 minutes of discretionary time anyway. It's just you want to spend it on something that is actually meaningful and satisfying to you, as opposed to just seeing that time completely disappear. And when I had people try this as one of my studies for big time, their levels of time satisfaction went up significantly. They were less likely to be counting, just wishing the time away till bedtime, or thinking that, life was all stressful and terrible in the evenings. Like, you can have wonderful weekday evenings. There's going to be some stuff you don't like, although maybe you can make some of that better as well. There's no reason to suffer unnecessarily. And you can also choose to use some of your discretionary time for things that bring you joy.
Yeah. So if I was to summarize, Laura, the single word that I believe more than anything and that I teach, like it's the most foundational thing I teach, it's intentionality. And very similar to what you just said, I believe that when you are intentional with your time, you get so much more gratification back from how you're using it. So, as an example, one of my clients just had is just coming back from maternity leave with her second kid, and she and her husband both had one full month that overlapped of parental leave where they both got to be off at the same time. And I told her, my only desire for you is before this happens, before you go into it, let's create a list of the ways that you hope to spend it. So that way the whole month doesn't pass you by and you're like, holy crap, what just happened? Like it was kind of nice to be able to just show up and do life together. But I don't feel like we actually got anything out of it beyond just lifing. I just am such a believer in the power of intentionality there. The other thing that struck me when you were talking, it's a dot I've slowly connected for myself is when I think about kids at school, they're very regimented. Think about what they're able to fit in their short little workday and how many subjects they're able to cover, but it's because they're very calculated about that. So when you said like there are 4 hours for most people after they get off work before they go to bed, if we were like hypothetically to if we were to segment that 4 hours into the buckets like our kids do at school, we can probably get a lot done. And probably also facilitate better boundaries for our kids so they're moving through the routine and they're not, I don't know, they're not dilly-dallying at the dinner table or getting ready for bed. Like there's probably something there. I haven't tried it myself, but now I'm tempted.
Yeah. Well, just even mapping out your golden hours, like, okay, this is what I
Yeah.
want my evening to look like. And it may not entirely go like that, but most people haven't even thought that through, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is what the arc of the evening will be, starting from the end of my workday to the time my head is on the pillow. This is what I would like those 4 to 5 hours to look like. There are things that have to happen, but again, those things don't need to consume the entire 4 to 5 hours. And if you've sort of thought that through, you'll start to see the space that might be there and start to ask the question of how you would like to use that time.
Yeah, I love that. I really like that concept a lot. So you started this by talking about or equating this to the golden years and the retirement. Let's pull in that thread for a second. When there is somebody out there that surely is inevitably saying, I'm going to do this, but when things calm down, someday things will calm down. And when that happens, I'm going to accomplish X, Y, and Z goals. And the next thing they know, they're retired and someday never happened. It's never going to come. So what is your philosophy or advice for somebody that is kind of caught in that loop of someday, someday, someday?
Well, I mean, maybe life will calm down at some point, but I'm not sure it'll be in the next year or two. And so I think you probably want to build systems that work with your life as it is now. And whenever people say I don't have time for something, what they mean is that it is not a priority. And that may be totally true, right? Like, that is not, maybe it isn't a priority for you to go back to school right now. And there might be very good reasons for that. But if it truly is, then it's a question of moving around other things to make it fit. And, one of the wonderful things of looking at something like 8,760 hours instead of just 24 is you start to see that even really big things can fit quite easily within that time, right? If you have 18 weeks in a semester, 2 times a year, that's 36 weeks a year. Let's say you're doing, 5 hours of classes in those 36 weeks. That is, I'm going to do my math here. I believe that's 180 hours in the year. Well, there's 8,760 hours in the year. You probably have to study for those two, but let's double it. Now we've got 360 hours of 8,760 hours. You triple it, we're at like 540 hours. Again, it's not all of it. It might feel like it seems like all of it, but it isn't. It's still a small chunk of this overall time we have. And so by inviting people to think bigger, you start to see that even things that do require some time commitment can fit in life, especially if it's not every day, if it's not every week. There will be seasons that are busier than others, but there will also be calmer times.
Yeah, and also just appreciating that it's a marathon too. You said something way earlier, which feels like a lifetime ago at this point in the podcast, that essentially is implying that we've got many years that compound. Like this is a marathon. This is it was in the concept of looking at 24 hours versus a week. I think that's the same thing too as it relates to a year versus a decade, where most of the listeners are very high achieving. That's why they're listening to a podcast like this, because they always are challenging themselves to be at their best. But that high achieving energy inherently always like fills us like makes us feel like we're not doing enough. Like we need to push, we need to push, we need to go more, we need to do more. We can like we can do this. But sometimes we just need to call a timeout and say, you know what? This is going to happen, but it doesn't have to happen in 6 months. It can happen in 2 years. And there's literally no reason that should be a problem because we do need to treat our life as a marathon, not like this finite period that everything needs crammed into, where it's so tight and so compact and so exhausting, we can't actually enjoy the journey.
And one of my favorite time management strategies from big time is actually breaking very big things into very small steps. And the example I use is reading War and Peace, which is a big book, but has 361 very short chapters. And so the way I tackled this is reading one chapter a day for a year. And each of those chapters is like 3 or 4 pages, couple of minutes. So a couple of minutes a day for a year, and the book is read. And the same with many, many other things you could do, a big project. Somebody wants to declutter their house. I mean, they're like, I need to take 3 weeks off work to declutter my house. Like, you're not going to get 3 weeks off work. And if you do, you're not going to want to clean out your house. So let's be honest here. But could you find 10 to 15 minutes a day repeatedly, 5 days a week for 6 months? If you could, I'm guessing your house is going to look a lot better, right? Small things done repeatedly truly do add up. And the difference between nothing and just a little bit more than nothing is cumulatively great.
Yeah, not to mention it's also what gives you some of the momentum to keep going. That's it, ironically exactly what I told my house manager last week. I said, Priya, we are going to slowly get these 3 storage rooms organized, and I'm going to give you about a half hour all 3 days you're here, and that's like what, half hour, half hour, half hour. We'll eventually get there. Well, that was ironically the last question I had for you, Laura, was you hitting on that exact thing. You stole my thunder, which is beautiful. So let's move on then to the lightning round questions so we can wrap up. The very first one, what's your go-to stress busting activity?
Going for a run.
Oh, good
This
for
is
you.
really my way that I turn a mood around. There's something about, pounding it out, sweating a little, that the world looks entirely different afterwards.
Oh, I bet. Running was very cathartic for me as well before I had to quit, but I am
I know.
obsessed.
I'm sure it'll happen to me at some point. Everyone's knees give out eventually, but
Yep.
I'll
Yep,
run
that
with
was and
I'll
that was
run
my
with it as
knees and
long as
my
I can.
yeah, you truly take advantage. Second, what's the last book or podcast you loved?
So I'm doing a project this year. I like to do a long reading project every year. And I have been reread, like years ago I read through all of Shakespeare's works at a very slow rate again, but this year I'm just revisiting old favorites. And so I have been rereading Midsummer Night's Dream, the play,
Wow.
and it is so hilarious. It is just so funny. And I've seen it performed a number of times live, so I sort of have the different actors' voices in my head as I'm reading through the dialogue. But yeah, it's just such a good work, and then you can tell yourself, I'm reading Shakespeare. Look how intellectual I am. But
Have you
it's
read?
all like jokes. I mean, it's jokes, right? But
Yeah.
you can call it intellectual.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would give you that much credit for sure. And that's also the first time I've thought of this in at least a decade. Did you happen to read Jodi Picoult's last book
I
on?
haven't. No, no.
Okay, if you like her stuff, it's a very different flavor for her, but she essentially wrote about Shakespeare and how his pieces came to be,
Hmm.
and perhaps the woman behind them that
Yeah, yes.
that brought them to bear. So I think it is a fiction book, but is loosely based on a lot of the punchline is it's based on a lot of perception that there was a woman that actually penned a lot of
Yeah.
Shakespeare, because there's no way that he could possibly like pump out the volume he did. And there's a lot she debunks a lot of it. It's very fascinating, but very different for her stuff. Okay, last, if you could wave a magic wand, what task would you eliminate forever?
I mean, the thing that comes to mind first is emptying the dishwasher, just because I really dislike it. But I mean, the honest truth is it takes 4 to 5 minutes. And so, maybe I'd want to get rid of it, but it wouldn't free up that much time. So,
I love that
um,
you said that. Because that was something my client and I did in one of the time studies that she was doing. And she came back and she's like, Courtney, it only takes 2 minutes. It doesn't mean that I don't hate the task, but it only took me 2 minutes to
yeah,
unload the dishwasher. I
yeah.
was like, well, just let that sit with you. So every time that you get up and you're pissed that you have to do it, at least you're ripping off the band-aid in 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes and it's done. And do it while you're making your coffee in the morning, and then you don't have to think about it again.
Yeah, well, you've got a full house, so I can appreciate why that happens to be at the top of your list with that many people. Okay, Laura, how do people reach you? And obviously, I'm going to link Big Time in the show notes so that anybody can go there to purchase it. Please support Laura and her writing. But beyond linking the book, how else can I direct people?
Well, people can come visit my website, which is lauravanderkam.com. It's just my name. And I have information there about Big Time and all my other books, if you'd like to check those out, about my podcasts, Before Breakfast and Best of Both Worlds, which is one more focused on work and life and the intersection of both. Subscribe to my newsletters, all that good stuff. I blog a couple times a week. There's more content there than you probably want to deal with, but come visit my website, lauravanderkam.com. I love to hear from people.
Yeah, Best of Both Worlds is one of my favorite podcasts. Well, Laura, it has been an absolute pleasure having you. It truly means a lot to me. You know that I've been a fangirl of yours for years. So it just is kind of surreal that I get to be sitting here having a conversation with you. Congratulations on book number 8. And I will link all of that in the show notes. So, listeners, I think that one of the themes that you hopefully took away today was that most of us don't need more productivity hacks. It is more instead about being more intentional and having better protection around our time and energy. So, if you feel some sort of low simmering resentment around all that you're having to carry and don't feel like there is enough time for you, it also might be that you need stronger boundaries. So I'm going to link a 3-minute quiz that you can take around where you might be leaking your energy and boundaries. It's at workingmomsmovement.com/boundaries. I'll have that in the show notes as well. But until next time, friends, if nobody's told you lately, you're doing a great job. You've got this, mama. And if this conversation resonated, especially the part about planning your week and protecting the hours that matter most, the next episode you should listen to is episode 72, How I Design My Corporate Work Week to Protect My Energy. Because here's the truth, understanding your time is only half of the equation. The real transformation happens when you intentionally design your work week around your energy and your priorities. In that episode, I walk through exactly how I structured my own corporate calendar so I could perform at a high level without burning out. So go queue up episode 72 next. It's going to help you rethink how your work week should actually function.